The title I chose for this morning is Achan's Legacy and Ours. The Power of One to Save or Destroy. Taken from Joshua chapter 7. Not exactly a happy story. So if you were coming this morning hoping for a happy story, I apologize. But it was what was next. It's what I'd originally intended to include last Sunday, and a few days earlier decided, no, this is not going to fit. It needs to be its own. And so here we are. Joshua 7, while you're turning there in your Bible, I invite you to read with me two brief statements from the letters of the Apostle Paul, statements that give additional meaning to stories like the ones we've been studying and the one we will look at this morning. So will you read with me from the screen? Everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. That one from Romans 15 and this one from 1 Corinthians 10. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. We're looking this morning at wisdom and warnings from an incident in the life of a man named Achan, as recorded in Joshua chapter 7. It's a single incident, but it's all we know of him other than the facts that he had a family, and that, like every other man in the nation of Israel at this time in their history, except for Joshua and Caleb, Achan had spent his entire adult life in the wilderness. Thus, this one incident became his legacy, and it illustrates dramatically the power of one person to save or to destroy. But before we get into Achan's story, let's review briefly where we are and how we got here. Israel has witnessed God deliver the entire city of Jericho into their hands. After having crossed the Jordan River in miraculous fashion, as you may recall, in order to take possession of the land that God had promised them. In obedience to God's command, they followed the priest who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. They marched around the city once every day for 6 days. On the seventh day, they marched around the city 7 times. When they finished, they blew the ram's horns, and all the people shouted, and the walls collapsed. The entire city was destroyed, except for a woman named Rahab, who a few days earlier had sheltered and hidden 2 Israelite spies and who helped them escape. In exchange, they had promised protection for her and her entire family. And that's exactly what happened. Israel won a great victory. Jericho was destroyed. Rahab and her entire family were spared and brought safely into the protection of Israel's camp. And that was where we ended last week in Joshua chapter 6. But let's pause here for a moment. I want to consider briefly Rahab's legacy and the power of one person to save or destroy. See, Rahab was one person living in a city destined for destruction who showed kindness, faith, and courage, bringing salvation and blessing to her entire family. Ultimately, her offspring, as we looked last week, was instrumental in bringing salvation to the whole world, as Rahab became part of the line of Abraham that would eventually lead to the line of David, from which the Messiah came. Now let's turn the page. Joshua chapter 7, verse 1. If you have your Bibles, you can follow along. Much of this we're just going to be reading. Verse 1, as we read together moments ago, says, "But Israel violated the instructions about the things set apart for the Lord." That verse continues, "A man named Achan had stolen some of these dedicated things, so the Lord was very angry with the Israelites." And by the way, Achan was the son of Carmi, a descendant of Zimri, son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah. Now, imagine for a moment You're watching a mystery movie. We've just watched the opening scene, but it's obvious that no one else in the movie knows about the crime that we have just witnessed. It's just there for the viewers, who are the omniscient observer. This first verse in Joshua 7 is giving us that glimpse into what has actually happened, but nobody else knows a thing about it. And as Achan is shown now in this movie, back in his tent with the stolen goods, the camera pans to the wall, a wall of the inside of the tent, and there is this tapestry, and on that tapestry is a delineation of Achan's lineage. And we get the distinct impression that this information just might be significant later in the movie. Achan, the son of Carmi, descendant of Zimri, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah. And we're sitting next to someone and they say, hey, I bet we need to know that later. The scene fades to black and opens on a map of the region as the main action begins. And now the story begins to unfold. As we read in Joshua 7, Joshua sent some of his men from Jericho to spy out the town of Ai. Hard to pronounce. That's my best effort at researching that. Spelled A-I. The town of Ai, east of Bethel, near Beth-Aven. When they returned, they told Joshua, there's no need for all of us to go up there. It won't take more than 2,000 or 3,000 men to attack Ai. Since there are so few of them, don't make all our people struggle to go up there. So, approximately 3,000 warriors were sent, but they were soundly defeated. The men of Ai chased the Israelites from the town gates as far as the quarries, and they killed about 36 who were retreating down the slope. The Israelites were paralyzed with fear at this turn of events, and their courage melted away. Joshua and the elders of Israel tore their clothing in dismay, threw dust on their heads, and bowed face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord until evening. Then Joshua cried out, O sovereign Lord, why did you bring us across the Jordan River if you were going to let the Amorites kill us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side. Lord, what can I say now that Israel has fled from its enemies? For when the Canaanites and all the other people of the land living in the land hear about it, they will surround us, will wipe our name off the face of the earth. And then what will happen to the honor of your great name? But the Lord said to Joshua, get up. Wow, that's a little harsh. Joshua, get up. Why are you lying on your face like this? Israel has sinned and broken my covenant. They have stolen some of the things that I commanded must be set apart for me, and have not only stolen them, but have lied about it, and have hidden the things among their own belongings. That is why the Israelites are running from their enemies in defeat, for now Israel itself has been set apart for destruction. I will not remain with you any longer unless you destroy the things among you that were set apart for destruction. Get up. Command the people to purify themselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Hidden among you, O Israel, are things set apart for the Lord. You will never defeat your enemies until you remove these things from among you. God continued, in the morning you must present yourselves by tribes, and the Lord will point out the tribe to which the guilty man belongs. That tribe must come forward with its clans, and the Lord will point out the guilty clan. That clan will then come forward, and the Lord will point out the guilty family. The one who has stolen what was set apart for destruction will himself be burned with fire along with everything he has, for he has broken the covenant of the Lord and has done a horrible thing in Israel. Well, that was a long slide, and that's a lot to take in, but I want to give you some perspective here. I'm going to try to explain a scale of finding one in, like, let's say 120,000. Okay? I know there are probably 1 million Israelites at this point in their history, maybe more than that. I'm just picking out some numbers that work with the graphics on the screen at the moment. What you see up there is probably just 12 boxes. But each of those boxes contain 100 smaller boxes, which aren't really boxes, they're made up of dots. Each of those little boxes has 100 dots in it. So on this screen at the moment, there are 10,000 dots. And let's just say that's the number of, I may have had that wrong, let's see. Yes, in this box, there are 10,000. Remember the slide before it had 12 of these boxes. So this represents 120 dots. There are actually that many dots on the screen. The second one is 10,000, just one of those squares, one representing one tribe of Israel, the men, the fighting men in that tribe. Now, these aren't the numbers. You go read in the Bible, you won't find these even numbers. I'm just trying to give us some perspective here. And now we're down to one family out of one of those tribes. This represented one of those things that to you just looked like a tiny square, and now it's expanded and it's a square made up of 100 dots. And one of those dots is red. So one man out of perhaps 120,000 men, that's what we're looking for here. You're Achan at the moment. You know what you've done. The whole nation is being called to assemble, and you're thinking, what are the chances? Well, let's read on. Early the next morning, Joshua brought the tribes of Israel before the Lord, and the tribe of Judah was singled out. So now we've singled out one tribe out of the 12. Then the clans of Judah came forward, and the clan of Zerah was singled out. So we look in the illustration. Now that's one little column out of one of those tribes, out of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then the families of Zerah came forward, and the family of Zimri was singled out. So now we're down to one box out of one tribe, out of 12 tribes of Israel. And in that box is one clan, one family representing maybe 100 men. Every member of Zimri's family was brought forward person by person, and Achan was singled out. One out of 100. Must have been a terrifying thing to go through, as that kept getting reduced, and every time Achan was in the middle of the group, and suddenly he could hide no longer. Then Joshua said to Achan, "My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, by telling the truth. Make your confession and tell me what you have done. Don't hide it from me." So Achan replied, "It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. Among the plunder I saw a beautiful robe from Babylon, 200 silver coins, and a bar of gold weighing more than a pound. I wanted them so much that I took them. They are hidden in the ground beneath my tent, with the silver buried deeper than the rest." Now let's pause for a moment. There are 4 really important words that I think most of you have heard before, and could probably, if you really think about them, tell me another story in the Bible that has all 4 of those words. What is it Achan said? Among the plunder I saw a beautiful robe from Babylon, 200 silver coins, and a bar of gold weighing more than a pound. I wanted them. I desired them. I coveted them so much that I took them. They are now hidden in the ground beneath my tent. Want me to squeeze that together a little bit? I saw, I coveted, I took, I hid. I saw, I desired, I took, I hid. It's as old as the Garden of Eden. And it's not the last time in the Bible. Even a godly man like King David faced a point in his life where I saw, I coveted, I took, I hid. It's the story of humanity. It's my story. It's your story. So suddenly, maybe we're not just talking about Achan. Maybe it's coming closer home. Well, as we continue to read in the story, Joshua sent some men to make a search. They ran to the tent. They found the stolen goods hidden there, just as Achan had said, with the silver buried beneath the rest. They took the things from the tent and brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites. Then they laid them on the ground in the presence of the Lord. Then Joshua and all the Israelites took Achan, the silver, the robe, the bar of gold, his sons, daughters, cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats, tent, and everything he had, brought them to the valley of Achor. Then Joshua said to Achan, "Why have you brought trouble on us? The Lord will now bring trouble on you." And all the Israelites stoned Achan and his family and burned their bodies. They piled a great heap of stones over Achan, which remains to this day. That is why the place has been called the Valley of Trouble ever since. The Valley of Achor. Sounds a little like Achan, doesn't it? But Achor means trouble. Moses said to Achan, "You have brought trouble on us. The Lord will now bring trouble on you." That is again why the place has been called the Valley of Trouble ever since. So the Lord was no longer angry. I want to take just a minute or two to pause here and review the story, particularly what strikes us as extremely harsh consequences. I don't love sharing stories like this. I've heard a few gasp quietly along the way as this story unfolded. There are some things that strike us, that strike me as extremely harsh consequences for just stealing a few things. And it's especially worthy of note that God is the one who is initiating the consequences. God is the one who withdraws his blessing and protection from Israel's army. And I can't explain that other than to say that somehow God perhaps knew that all of humanity needed this reminder. I think more often than not, our actions have consequences that can be traceable. And I think maybe we needed this picture of a direct correlation because so often we can't see it. So often we don't believe it's really true. We think this is just affecting me. It's not going to hurt anybody else. And we may not be able to see how our actions have consequences and could actually result in the loss, the defeat in a battle. Some of you know what I'm about to read. A very short poem, if you will, that illustrates how the actions of one can actually have natural consequences, leading all the way to defeat in battle. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. A horseshoe, a cobbler, cut corners, whatever the reason. One man's actions, one nail missing. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider in battle was lost, or the rider was lost. For want of the rider, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. Not only is it possible for our actions to have that kind of consequences, even with natural cause and effect, it is also possible for our actions, for my actions, to have that kind of impact on my own family. Illustrated harshly here, yes. Remember what Paul wrote about stories, these stories being here for our good. Some of them to give encouragement, others to give warning. And then he said, whoever thinks he stands, take heed lest he falls. So let's return to legacy and to the power of one to save or destroy. Remember Rahab? Let's put these side by side. We'll do them one and then the other, but you'll understand. Rahab's legacy, remember this was one person living in a city destined for destruction, who chose to show kindness, faith, and courage, bringing salvation and blessing to her entire family. Ultimately, her offspring brought salvation to the whole world. Achan's legacy. One person living in a nation destined for blessing showed greed, disregard for the command of God, and disregard for the potential impact of his actions on his fellow soldiers, several of whom died, on the entire nation. Ultimately, he brought destruction upon himself and his entire family. Not a happy story. But here's a question for us. What will be your legacy? What will be my legacy? What will be our legacy?